As the IDF claimed today that Hamas is no longer in control of northern Gaza, the clamour is growing around the world again for a humanitarian pause in the fighting. The UN chief described the humanitarian situation in Gaza as catastrophic. The Israeli army says it's advanced significantly inside Gaza after encircling Gaza City, where Hamas, which is designated a terrorist organisation by the UK, has its headquarters. The IDF are continuing to urge Palestinians to evacuate south along the Salah ad-Din corridor, which was kept open for an extra hour today. Within 24 hours, at least 15,000 people have now fled south. And the Foreign Office says more than 150 British nationals have managed to leave through the Rafah crossing to Egypt. Well, international journalists are not permitted to enter Gaza at the moment, but today, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Secunder Kermani was taken inside the Strip by the Israeli military. During the short trip, we were not able to film beyond their jurisdiction. In addition, our footage was subject to a security review by the Israeli Defense Force. But our words and the questions we posed were not subject to any restrictions. We decided to agree to these restrictions in order to be able to report on part of the Israeli operation inside the territory. And I must warn you again, some of you will find some of the footage in Secunder's report upsetting.
The war-ravaged outskirts of embattled Gaza City, an apocalyptic landscape now firmly under the control of Israeli soldiers. We're here with members of Infantry Division 828. The most intense fighting of this bloody conflict is beginning now in the heart of this city. Under the watch of Israeli soldiers, desperate Gazan civilians, whole families, some holding white flags, are fleeing their homes for the south. One man drags an elderly woman along in a chair. As its assault ramps up, Israel has warned residents to leave the city along this road and during specific times of the day. Hamas has called on them to stay. The exodus is a deeply uncomfortable sight. We're not allowed by the military to go any closer. But coming here with them is the only way for foreign journalists to get a first-hand glimpse of this deadly conflict.
You call this a humanitarian corridor. A lot of people watching will see it as the forced displacement of a population being subjected to brutal collective punishment. How would you respond?
First, I don't remember. I haven't called the people in the Be'eri kibbutz that has been slaughtered, that has been raped, that has been did the most hated crimes that human can do to other, had a human corridor over there when they have murdered 1,200 people over there. What we think over here is an attempt made by the IDF to save the people of Gaza from Hamas itself and to help the people of Gaza save their lives by separating between them and the Hamas terrorists.
We see two Palestinian men detained, accused of acting suspiciously. The UN says 15,000 people fled south just yesterday, though tens of thousands of others still remain. Soldiers call out in Hebrew in case some of the 240 Israeli hostages are being smuggled out too. Footage filmed on the Salahuddin Road by Palestinian journalists gives you a true sense of scale. There are young, there are old, clutching whatever's left of their lives. Across Gaza, 1.5 million people, 3/4 of the population, have been displaced from their homes. Israel blames Hamas for hiding amongst civilians, but the anger here is directed at those dropping the bombs.
There was shelling and bombardment all night long. We have disabled people. We left our home because the whole area was evacuated. We moved to the schools, but the schools weren't safe either. We didn't have any food or water. There is no life in Gaza.
This is the hell they're running from. the home of the Al-Dakas family in Gaza City, reduced to rubble in an Israeli strike. Israel says it's killing Hamas commanders. But where should Gaza's children, Gaza's parents, go? Fleeing south is no guarantee of safety. This, a hospital in Khan Yunis, where many have fled to. Back with the Israeli military, we're heading to another location inside Gaza. Access around the strip is tightly controlled. The army has reviewed our footage to prevent sensitive operational details being broadcast. For the soldiers here, reeling like the rest of Israeli society from the massacre of October the 7th, this feels a war against an existential threat. Suddenly, not far from us, a clash with Hamas fighters erupts.
The fighting at times has been pretty intense here. You can hear gunshots ringing out around me. It's been even more fierce further inside Gaza. We're going to have to leave here now. But Israel still doesn't have a real plan on what happens next here in Gaza, even if and when Hamas is defeated.
Lieutenant Colonel Gilad Pasternak, who's escorting us, has buried 20 of his friends, soldiers and civilians in the past month. He's fought in 2 previous wars in Gaza. We drive back into Israel together, along the same roads Hamas used on October the 7th.
Are you confident that in 5 years, a decade's time, 2 decades' time, your children won't be here where you are fighting this same war?
I have a 2-year-old son at home and 2 weeks daughter, baby girl at home. I don't know if they had to fight in Gaza. I hope they won't. But I can tell you that if I want to be fighting in Gaza today, they won't be here in the next decade to fight nobody.
Israel's vast military superiority means they might well win this war. But with deep-rooted Palestinian anger and resentment spiraling, who can believe that will bring an end to this decades-old conflict?
Well, Secunder is now back on the Israeli side of the border and joins me now from Ashkelon, just north of Gaza. Secunder, a very compelling piece, which you, I gather, had to film yourself because you weren't allowed in with the cameraman. Tell us more about the conditions of your short stint in Gaza today.
Yeah, that's right, Matt. Because space was restricted, a number of other foreign journalists were taken in alongside me. I had to film it by myself. There were a number of conditions. We weren't allowed to travel anywhere within Gaza independently. We were not, for example, able to go and speak to those displaced Gazans who you saw in that report. We were able to ask the Israeli army whatever we wanted. We had to submit our footage to the Israeli military to ensure that operational details, operational secretive and sensitive information was not broadcast, but our script was entirely our own. Aside from events within Gaza, I think there's been an important development today. It seems there's been lots of discussion going on behind closed doors about the possibility of a humanitarian pause. Israel has previously ruled out any kind of ceasefire until all the hostages are released. That's not the same, though, as a humanitarian pause. And Israeli officials seem, up until recently, to have been rejecting that idea because they say that they're worried that if they stop fighting even for a brief period, it will be hard to resume it. But international pressure on them is growing. President Biden had discussed this idea of a humanitarian pause earlier this week. It would see, if one does happen, a number of hostages, around a dozen released, and a humanitarian pause for around 3 days, during which time more humanitarian aid would be able to flow into Gaza. But will Israel countenance doing this, before it's achieved its stated goals of, in its words, eliminating Hamas? We'll have to see.
Okay, Secunder Kermani, thank you very much indeed. Well, we're now joined by the General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative political party, Mustafa Barghouti, in Ramallah. Mustafa, it's good to have you back on the programme. I just want to start off by asking about the mass exodus of people for their own safety from the bombardment of the Israelis from northern Gaza, how legitimate is the fear that many of these people apparently have that they might not be able to return?
Absolutely, because we have a historical experience. These people have been ethnically cleansed more than once. Everybody that was cleansed out of what became Israel in 1948, and 70% of the people of Gaza are among those, were never allowed to come back. In 1967, those who were evicted from Palestine and from the occupied territories of the West Bank were never allowed to come back. So we have history here, which shows very clearly that the goal is ethnic cleansing. And these people in the north of Gaza are put between the choice of ethnic cleansing or genocide. With bombardment, you saw the destruction. Most houses have been completely destroyed. People are humiliated, but there are still thousands and thousands of people in the north and in the city of Gaza, deprived from water, deprived from electricity, deprived from medicines. I receive calls from families who cannot leave and would not be able to leave, and they tell me they ran out of their medications and they don't know what to do.
Right. The Israelis obviously would deny accusations of genocide. They would deny accusations of expulsion and of ethnic cleansing. And I think they've said that those people would be free to return if and when the conditions are safe or right. And part of that is the removal of Hamas from northern Gaza, which they now claim that they've done. What do you think will happen to Hamas in the future?
Nothing, except that they might remove their presence, their obvious presence in the areas they occupy, but they will not be able to eradicate them, because this is, as was told many times, it's an idea before it is an organization. And the reason that why Hamas appeared on the scene is the fact that we've been subjected to ethnic cleansing for 75 years, subjected to Israeli military occupation, the longest in modern history, for 56 years. And in addition to that, we are now subjected to a repetition of the same process of ethnic cleansing and oppression. The people of Gaza have been under Israeli military siege for 17 years. The 80% of Palestinian educated young people were unemployed because of Israeli siege. Okay. So when Israel is pushing people down, that does not mean they will forget their country or forget their right of return and their right to be free from occupation and oppression.
Right. Let me ask you this then. If Hamas cannot be removed as an idea or perhaps even as a movement, is it possible that Hamas will end up being far more dominant in the West Bank, which would be a much bigger headache for the Israelis and also, many would argue, for many Palestinians like yourself in the West Bank?
I think you shouldn't put everything within the ranks of Hamas. The big question is the following for Palestinian people. If we are oppressed,
would you be happy to live under Hamas in the West Bank?
No. Let me answer your question. I didn't answer your question first. If we are oppressed, if we are occupied, if we are subjected to a system of apartheid, do we have the right to resist injustice as equal human beings to Europeans who had to resist occupation? Or it is okay for Europeans to fight occupation, but it is forbidden for Palestinians? That would be racism. So the idea, Israel is not attacking Hamas only. It is attacking all Palestinians. It is oppressing all Palestinians. And I told you before, if we had elections, neither Hamas nor Fatah would get an absolute majority. It would be a pluralistic system.
Okay.
And I am not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm afraid of only one thing: the occupation and the oppression of the Israelis.
Okay, all right. Got to leave it there. Mustafa Barghouti, thank you very much indeed from Ramallah. And that's all for now from Jerusalem. Let's go to Krish in London. Krish.
Well, a short while ago, I spoke to the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom, Zippy, Hotovely, as part of a long interview to be released tomorrow online. We started off reflecting, a month after the October 7th Hamas attack, on whether how she felt about it had changed at all.
We as Israelis, we didn't realize the scale of atrocities. And a month after, we understand that this is something that will change Israel forever. This is not another terror attack. This is not another chapter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is the fight of a democratic country versus barbarism.
What about people who say, who are sort of the Free Palestine movement, people who want a Palestinian state? Do you accept that they are a legitimate view, legitimate protests?
I would say that I'm also
peaceful and not a threat to...
Well, I also want to have a better future with the Palestinians. I support a better future between Israelis and Palestinians. The question is...
But you don't support a Palestinian state, do you?
But I think that this idea, this concept, has failed a long time ago.
A Palestinian state is just a failed idea.
As you know,
yes.
that we had at least 5 times in history that the Palestinians were offered to have a state. They always refused. And I tell you why they refused, because they said, unless you give us the right of return, we're not willing to sign any agreement with Israel.
I think most people listening to this conversation will conclude that there is no prospect of Israel even looking at self-determination for the Palestinian people now.
I think this is not my duty. My duty is to protect my people as the State of Israel. And at the moment, the facts on the ground are that the 7th of October was a watershed moment, that Israel understood it cannot protect its people because the terror organization is there.
Let's talk about the war and the way it's being prosecuted.
Yes.
1,400 people were killed on October the 7th.
And 241
maybe
still kept
7,000
hostage.
people injured. And over 200 people kept hostage.
First of all, every loss of life is a tragedy. There is no question.
Do you mean that, or is that a political answer?
No. I totally mean that. I don't think that that anyone wanted the 7th of October attack. We didn't start that. They started that. Israel is targeting only military targets. If you would have seen the Gaza map, you would have seen lots of blocks of red spots that have launching areas, which means that these places has become military targets.
Right now, Israeli bombs are blowing up Palestinian civilians.
After the Palestinians were given the opportunity to move to the south area of Gaza, opportunity was not given to the children of Sderot, Kfar Aza.
Many of them have been killed after they've moved as well, and we've seen evidence of that. So
I think the majority of them being prevented by Hamas.
So there are plenty of people being killed in circumstances which we'll never get to the truth of, is the truth, because we will never get independent investigators in while this is going on.
Christian, I'll tell you, I'll make it simple to you. This is a democratic country fighting according to the international law. We saw yesterday.
No, only in your own terms. You cannot say that as a statement.
I'll give you yesterday's visual. Visual, it was screened in every television in the world, so you cannot deny that. You could see Israeli tank giving a support and escort of security to Palestinians moving to the south. This is something that Hamas is not doing for them and Israel is doing for them.
Let me ask you about the pressure that you're coming under from the international community. So America wants you to have some sort of humanitarian pause. Many of the regional partners want that. Is that a possibility?
So we are willing to give, as you know, as much humanitarian aid as needed when it comes to water, food and medicine, which we think is important and essential. But we definitely think that in order to do that, it's enough to have those pauses that bring trucks of equipment to the Gaza Strip. We don't need ceasefire that will play only to the hands of Hamas.
So just to understand what that means, you're talking about a few hours in which humanitarian convoys can go in. You're not talking about...
Humanitarian aid keeps on coming.
You're not talking about a 3-day humanitarian pause,
will be a ceasefire,
for example, which would be a ceasefire. That's what people are talking about today.
It's not going to be helpful. And I think the Prime Minister said it yesterday clearly, that in order to have humanitarian break or something that is more than a few hours, you need to have all our hostages back. And I was
all of the hostages, because the other offer, as you know, that is being floated is a number of hostages in return for a ceasefire.
We're not going to let Hamas do this psychological terror warfare.
You don't think a peace can be built on a pause that becomes a ceasefire that becomes a peace? You don't believe in that?
No peace. 6th of October was a ceasefire.
Give me a timeline for when you think this is going to be...
I think it's going to take more than a few weeks. So it's going to be long few weeks, at least.
So you think, but we're talking weeks rather than months or years.
I don't know.
You think within weeks Hamas can be destroyed?
The truth is, I don't know. And the thing is that if you ask the military people, they are saying on the D-Day, you didn't know how long it's going to take to defeat Nazi Germany. So I think it's not on the same scale for sure, but we're just in the middle of a process when you still have so much infrastructure in the Gaza Strip to be dismantled. So it's going to take time.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Hoping for more peaceful days.